Oh my God. It's happened with me. Finally, the job was done. After weeks of putting in some real elbow grease, I managed to get my old mountain bike back in shape. It had its fair share of issues, but after days of sweat and toil, and wrestling with all the different parts that needed fixing, the bike was finally road ready. I'd been itching for a ride through the countryside, dreaming of coasting down those dirt roads, weaving between the fields, and cutting through the little patches of woods just outside town. After a quick test run to make sure everything was in working order, I headed back home to catch some sleep, knowing tomorrow would be the day. When the next morning rolled around, I felt like a kid waking up on Christmas. I was so pumped to get out there. Truth be told, I hadn't slept much the past few nights. I'd been so wrapped up in getting that bike fixed that it was all I could think about. That's just how I am. When I get into a project, I go all in, sometimes forgetting to slow down. I figured I'd finally catch up on some rest the night before, but the excitement kept me tossing and turning. In the end, the lack of sleep didn't matter much. The thrill of the ride was all the energy I needed to take on the day. Part 2, The Clearing. I headed out around 11 a.m., with a rough idea of the paths I'd take, but I figured I'd let the day guide me. If a new trail caught my eye, I'd be up for the adventure. The sun felt incredible on my skin, and that gentle breeze was the perfect touch. It was mid-October, but the weather was warmer than usual, making the day feel just about perfect. Maybe it wasn't just the weather, though. It could have been that sweet sense of accomplishment, finally getting to ride the bike I'd spent so much time fixing up myself. After a few miles, I found myself entering a small patch of woods. Out here, I was all alone, just me and the distant calls of birds. Nature has a way of surprising you, and today was one of those days. The silence, the breeze, the view, it all made me feel more alive than I'd felt in a long time. As I coasted down the trail, a path off to the left caught my attention. It seemed unfamiliar, even though I'd ridden through this area plenty of times before. Curiosity got the best of me, so I veered off and took it. I noticed a few signs along the way, pointing out that this was a hiking trail leading to a small town a few miles away. But then, just a few minutes later, another path appeared on my left. My curiosity was still burning, so I decided to check it out too. Pretty quickly, I realized this wasn't part of the trail. After just a short distance, I found myself in a small clearing, and it was clear that people had been here before. I hopped off my bike and set it down, thinking maybe I'd stumbled upon something interesting. The clearing was littered with cut trees and scattered branches, some old bags, and rusty canisters, probably left behind by workers who had been through here ages ago. The place looked like it hadn't seen a soul in years, with vegetation creeping over the abandoned objects. My little adventure was starting to feel like a treasure hunt. I wasn't out to take anything, but with everything looking so old and forgotten, it felt like I was discovering something hidden and lost to time. Part 3, The Clearing. Something shiny snapped me out of my thoughts, catching my eye from across the clearing. I turned my head in its direction and started walking toward it. Sitting on an old tree stump was a knife, looking practically brand new. Not just any knife either, this one looked like the pricey kind. It was long, with a razor-sharp edge, and had some golden inscription etched onto the blade. The word "free" was clearly visible. I chuckled to myself, thinking maybe it was a sign. After all, it did say free, right? So, I grabbed the handle and pulled the knife out of the stump. Just as I did, a loud noise erupted from the entrance of the clearing. It was followed by the sound of something barreling through the branches. I whipped around, trying to catch sight of whatever was making the noise, but as soon as I moved, the sound stopped dead. My heart started to race a little. I dropped the knife on the ground and took a few steps back. Suddenly, the place didn't feel so inviting anymore. Something about it was off, and I could feel the unease creeping up on me. I decided it was time to get back to my bike and leave. I picked up the pace, but the uneasiness only grew stronger. It felt like something was moving in the woods around me, rustling through the underbrush. Every time I turned my head to look, the sound would stop, leaving me more on edge. By the time I reached the entrance of the clearing, I was nearly sprinting, and then my heart nearly stopped. My bike was gone. I looked around in a panic, searching the spot where I knew I'd left it, but it was nowhere to be seen. I started to feel real fear setting in, especially when more rustling noises came from my right. I spun around, expecting to see something, or someone, but once again, the sound cut out just as I looked. Mustering up all the courage I had, I decided to walk toward the sound. There were just a few trees ahead, and beyond that, an empty field. But when I turned back and returned to the clearing's entrance, frustration got the better of me. I shouted into the trees, "Hey, that's not funny. Give me my bike back, you jerks." No answer. Frantically scanning the area, my eyes landed on a small white mass off to the left of the entrance. I headed toward it, clinging to the slim hope that it might be my bike. Deep down, I knew it was a long shot. My bike was mostly black, but I couldn't help myself. As I got closer, the truth hit me like a freight train. It wasn't my bike at all. What lay before me was a small pile of bones, some of which were much larger than anything you'd find in a chicken carcass. These bones were big enough to have belonged to something like a deer, a cow, or maybe even a person. I moved in closer, trying to figure out what kind of animal they came from, and that's when I noticed something even more disturbing. The bones weren't just scattered randomly, they were arranged in a deliberate, almost precise way, like someone had taken the time to stack them there. My heart pounded in my chest, and an icy wave of fear washed over me. What the hell was this place? Part of me wanted to turn and run, to get the hell out of there and never look back, but another part of me just couldn't let go of my bike. At this point, the fear and anxiety were overwhelming, worse than anything I'd ever felt before. And then it happened. I heard laughter, close behind me. Not just any laughter, but the unmistakable sound of a child giggling. This wasn't the laugh of some teenagers pulling a prank, this was a child. I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin, and every instinct screamed at me not to turn around, not to see what was behind me. But the moment I registered what was happening, I bolted. I didn't care about the bike anymore, I just wanted to get the hell out of there. If it was a prank, it was one hell of an elaborate setup because I never saw anyone around. As I tore down the path I'd originally taken, all I could think was, "Have fun with the bike, you jerks," as I ran as fast as I could away from that creepy clearing. After a few hours of a mix between running and walking, I finally arrived back in front of my house, utterly exhausted. I decided I needed to call some friends to come with me to check out the clearing. I didn't care about the bike anymore, but I wanted to find out who was behind that elaborate prank. With a group, I'd have a better chance of understanding what was going on and being ready for anything. As I approached my house, I noticed someone was in the front yard. Given the events of the day, it felt unsettling, and I was on edge. But my nerves eased instantly when I saw it was Jim, one of my old high school friends. "Hey man," he greeted me. "I came by about 5 minutes ago, but you weren't around. I was about to leave when I saw you walking up the street. I just had to say congrats. You did an amazing job with the bike," he added. "What?" I asked, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Man, you're not gonna belie," I started to say, but Jim cut me off. "The bike. It's incredible. You really fixed it up. I gotta admit, I didn't have high hopes, but you pulled it off," he said with enthusiasm. "I'm sorry, Jim, but what the hell are you talking about?" I began, but I stopped short. There, right behind Jim, was the bike. The very same bike I'd been working on for weeks, the exact bike I'd just lost. It was sitting right there, next to the wall where Jim was standing. "Anyway, you shouldn't leave it out like that when you're out for a walk," Jim continued. "Someone could steal it. It'd be a shame after all the work you put into it." I was stunned, unable to believe what I was seeing. What was happening? Had I been so exhausted that reality was slipping away? Was this all a dream? "Oh, and by the way," Jim said, handing me a small poster he'd been holding, "what's up with this flyer? I found it on your doorstep. It doesn't have much on it. Did someone just drop it off or what?" I looked at the flyer, which was completely white except for a single word written on it. My heart stopped for a moment as I read the word, free.